Hello, Danish and Ruhi. Thanks for joining Midday today for this conversation on your new book, Escaped, which released a few months ago. And it is about why London has emerged as a haven for Indian fugitives. And it offers a blow by blow account of the police investigations and the court proceedings in some high profile cases of the last several years. With the extradition cases such as of Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi, this topic was really calling out to be written on, and few would be as well placed as the two of you to dive into this subject. Both Danish and Ruhi are journalists and scholars based in London, and they've covered the UK and Europe region for Indian news channels and news publications. So it's going to be a fascinating conversation, I'm sure. To begin with, I was curious about when and how this journalistic assignment of covering the extraditions turned into a desire to make a book on the subject.
That's actually a very interesting question because we do not have like a moment in time where it was like, voila, this is what we are gonna do. I think it became a very organic progression of what we were anyways doing as journalists, covering these cases. But it also became a way in which our interest would drag us into reading about other cases and looking into details into case laws, and it was also fascinating, and we had like so much of material that we thought was brilliant, and it wasn't out there. There's no book on extradition that delves into cases in the kind of details that we have. There also seemed to be a lot of interest in the public thanks to Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi's cases that got prime time coverage. And there was also curiosity, I think, that not just with us, but also among the public to know more about these cases, to understand some of the final laws in a way that is not heavy on jargon, but it's more accessible to the wider public. And I think this was basically the genesis of the book. And we were lucky that Penguin was quite interested in this book. And that's how it took off. These cases are absolutely fascinating, and there's just a lot of fodder that we could explore. So that helped keep the motivation throughout the book.
And on the research process itself, which are some of the places and the people that took you to, and were there any challenges along the way?
Well, yeah, there were quite a few challenges, but I guess it also was a bit easy at the same time because we were covering these cases very intensely, writing on every possible aspects and attending the court cases. So, as far as the current cases were concerned, we were pretty on solid grounds because, having seen those deliberations and spoken to the lawyers from both the sides. But the historical cases that we write about, those were a bit challenging because then we had to dig out old judgments, for example, and the judgments of the high court and also of the magistrates court. That was quite challenging, so a lot of archival work we had to do. So we visited the Metropolitan London archives to access the court registers. We went to the National Archives here in Richmond, where we got a lot of background to the whole process of extradition. So all of that worked, and then of course speaking to top-notch barristers, extradition is a very sort of busy and lucrative practice. So speaking to those barristers, the solicitors, all of that added to our knowledge, and then of course India law enforcement agencies. We tracked down some of the officers who were kind enough to kind of share some documents and some notes. So yeah, it was a combination of legwork, sitting in the libraries, then also, of course, archival issues of the newspapers that we looked at the British Library. So a lot of newspaper reports we accessed, over the last 50 years, 70 years.
Yeah, and our stories and the books do not just start with the extradition cases. So we do a lot of background information in it as well. So it could be about the crime. For example, it could be the crime of match fixing. So, we looked up a lot of stuff on match fixing, what was happening at that period, what kind of allegations were made, what is match fixing, who were the people involved in that. So we did a lot of background research as well. And all of that has gone into the book to create that backdrop to the emergence of these crimes and then the subsequent extradition.
That's great. And also curious because you are, partners in life and partners in covering crime. And so, in terms of putting this book together, did you work on separate chapters or were you collaborating on each of the chapters? How did you really split the approach to writing the book?
I think we started with splitting off the chapters, but very soon we realized that it's not going to work. So by and large, we decided who is going to write which chapters. But then there was always an instance where Ruhi will come in, jump in, and say that this is the aspect that can be taken into consideration for this chapter, and similarly for me as well. I did the same if there was something that I came across. And we have kids, so it was not always possible to do research together. So a lot of time when I went to the libraries, I figured out, uncovered some stuff which was relevant to the chapter that Rui was writing. So it was a mix and match. But conceptually, we also tried to demarcate things. So especially about looking into how extradition law developed itself, or what were the cases that came in. How did they fit in with the narrative that India was trying to build to get these fugitives back home? So these were some of the aspects that we tried to divide, and well,
Well,
all's well. Something came out of it.
we really understand each other very well, and we fit in the gaps that our personalities might throw up in terms of this. So when you look at the chapters, it would be very difficult for you or anyone who knows us to point this has been written by one person or the other, because by the end of it, I think we rewrote chapters, we've looked at each other's chapters so many times, we've had constant debates and deliberations, and the result of that was both ideas were taken out for all possible things that we wanted to introduce in the chapters. So it turned out to be a really, really interesting book that we ourselves are very find it extremely difficult to figure out what parts of the book we have written individually. It's become a collective effort completely.
Coming to the subject itself, as you mentioned in Escaped, it is no longer surprising. In fact, it is now almost expected that a person who has reason to escape India will go to London, which is why you put this book together. What are the major factors really that has allowed London to become this haven for Indian fugitives to hide in plain sight?
Keyword is what you just said, Ranjita. It's hiding in plain sight. So all of these fugitives that have escaped to London, and let's look at the recent cases. We've got Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi. Before that, we had Iqbal Mirchi, Nadeem Sefi. We have Sanjay Bhandari now, and there are so many more coming. It could have also been Naresh Goyal, the Jet Airways head, if he wasn't stopped just before takeoff. A lot of people are coming to London. It is because they can live their life here as normal as possible while the cases go on in the courts, and those take a few years. And there's always hope at the end of it that they may be let off. So London gives them that opportunity to have the lifestyle that they are used to and they aspire to. Like with Vijay Mallya, he was very recently spotted at this really posh club called Annabelle, and this is while his court cases are going on, while the courts have asked him to be extradited, while he was fighting bankruptcy. Now he's been made bankrupt, but he was living his life pretty much as he would otherwise. He went for cricket matches, he's attended parties. Nirav Modi was walking his dog in Oxford Street before he was spotted. He set up a business, he was like living his life as normal as possible in a really posh flat in central London. Sanjay Bhandari has a posh Mayfair address where he's now hiding, but we know he's there. And Iqbal Mirchi, he came, he lived here, he lived a very open life. He had families, he had businesses. He was, in fact, even walking with his friends in Hyde Park just before his death. So he lived life to the fullest. And I think that's one of the reasons why people do come to this country, because it gives them that opportunity to live life to the fullest while these cases are going on. And as we've seen over the years, that many of them were let off, which just gave them their freedom back, like Shankaran or Nadeem Sefi.
Yeah.
So it's brilliant to do that for them.
Yeah, and also because there is this, it's the procedure is such that it's not such a quick process to have them back. It has to go through various judiciary channels. Before that, the Ministry of External Affairs in India has to initiate that request. So it's a long process. And extradition, as I said, is also a very busy sector for the lawyers. So it's, you can hire the best of the minds to help you and negotiate the legal framework, and then you can buy time, and all of that is there. There's also the rule of law. In England, you need to follow the procedures. There's no shortcut. The extradition treaty is very clear. What are the requirements? What is the process? And once the lawyers know all of that, it just falls in place for those people.
Interesting. And if you could take us through the major legal points in the extradition law and also how it has evolved over the years. Has it changed for the better or worse when it comes to allowing fugitives to be extradited successfully?
So, yeah, actually, we have Nirav Modi, Vijay Mallya cases now, and it's become like, okay, these people are there. But actually, as our book shows, a lot of high profile people have been coming to the United Kingdom for a very long time. There was links between both the countries because of the colonial empire and all of that still has an impact. And even post independence, because of the opportunities that UK provided, there has always been a constant flow of people. So it's very natural that a lot of people, young professionals or millionaires or students, they continue to come here and have a base here in the United Kingdom. The extradition treaty actually was filed in the background of Sikh separatism in the 80s. So the assassination of Indira Gandhi, New Delhi started making more loud demands with London that we need an extradition treaty, because there was no extradition treaty. It was an arrangement that continued from the colonial times with some minor changes. And India pressed for an extradition treaty. So the extradition treaty, especially, was signed keeping in mind the necessity to have troublemakers or people who are creating a right kind of a situation in India to be sent back, and especially in the context of Punjab and Kashmir. Now, what we are seeing are people who are committing financial frauds. So the nature of the cases have changed a lot, and perhaps that also has some lacunae, because the law was worked out to have terrorists and wanted criminals to be sent back. But now we have seen a flurry of financial fraudsters allegedly,
Yeah.
who are wanted.
In the beginning, we saw a lot of people were successfully extradited, and then there came a phase where India kept losing extradition cases. This was with Mirchi and Nadeem Sefi around that period, and it sort of became. I think this was something that built the confidence amongst many that maybe it's easier to just escape to the UK because it's, there is a way to wriggle out of court proceedings and not get extradited. One of the main reasons were jail conditions and shoddy paperwork. And a lot of fugitives have been banking on these two things to, find a way to wriggle out of these proceedings. But we are seeing this increasingly with Vijay Mallya's case, that assurances by governments are working to convince the courts that jail conditions would be on par with what the British courts expect. And also, the investigating agencies, in some cases, especially the cases which are under public scrutiny and under media glare constantly, they are doing a far better job submitting paperwork and collaborative evidence, which is turning the tide in some ways.
Apart from the rule of law and this, the human rights question, which is quite often argued, are there also economic considerations? I mean, that have allowed people to easily make that passage into UK over the years?
Yes, so Nirav Modi, for example, he came here by virtue of his investor visa. So the thing to remember is UK, London is a big financial hub of the world, right? Insurance, banking, financial services. It's very busy on that front, and they are always open for wealthy, high net worth individuals to come here and make London or UK as their base. So in some shape or form, UK has always allowed people to come if they are ready to park certain funds in the banks. Now, what happens is when these people take this route, the UK government does run a check. They do a background check. But if that person at the time of applying for the UK visas has no case or is not wanted by anybody, there is
Hmm.
no reason for them to deny that person a visa. So they get those visas, which has happened, for example, in Nirav Modi's case, right?
Yeah.
He came here through the investor visa, he got that visa, and then the fraud came out. So the fraud comes later, but because they already have the visa, by virtue of that, they cannot be just sent back,
Yeah.
right? And that's when the courts
Yeah.
step in, and then the whole process has to be, uh, gone through.
And it's also a simpler route to get residency here. So it's £2 million, which is nothing for many people in India, many businesses in India. That is all you need to invest to get your first investor visa, and then subsequently, you just have to get it renewed after a couple of years, and then you have your ILR. So when you have the right to residency here, then even if your passport is, if India takes away the passport, you can still live in this country while you battle out things that you need to. So there's no reason for you to be deported straight away if you have the right to live in this country. So a lot of businessmen in India are actually doing that. In fact, there is fear with Raj Kundra. They are, the investigating authorities are opposing his bail, saying that they are worried that he might escape to London.
I'm also wanting to touch on this one point you raise of an interesting shift, which is with the cases of Mallya and Modi and Iqbal Mirchi, they helped dislodge the idea of Gulf states as the most favored destination for those on the run, which was this widespread perception. If you could elaborate on that as well, that shift.
In the 80s and 90s, the Middle East was the destination, and there were so many gangsters, especially people from the underworld, who escaped Bombay and went to the Middle East, and it was such a huge process to get them back. Most of them will end in failures, and the Middle East had emerged as this gateway because it's not that far from India; it's just a couple of hours. It's relatively free for people to travel there short term, and then of course you can also have other regions around, where you can use the Middle East as a ground to collaborate with other criminals. And it was just very difficult because the bar was very high to get anyone extradited from the Middle East. So there were a lot of failures. In fact, the most wanted gangster, for example, Dawood Ibrahim, is known to have stayed there before he went away to Pakistan. So, and there are numerous examples. As far as the UK was
Yeah.
concerned, the issue was UK, there is still this rule of law. The things have to go in a certain fashion. In fact, I must also add, Ranjita, that the case of Nadeem
Sefi.
Sefi, that he was in London, and the Mumbai's police commissioner said this in a press conference that Nadeem Sefi is the prime accused. What we found out is that one reason behind publicly proclaiming at a very early stage that Nadeem Sefi is the prime accused was to ensure that he doesn't go to the Middle East, because Nadeem Sefi was in London at that time, and Mumbai police feared that if he gets a wind that he is being under the scanner, he might just go to Middle East. So they made that proclamation in a press conference, and they made a request to UK to arrest Nadeem Sefi. So that was the strategy because it was very difficult to get people from the Middle East. Now the tide has actually turned. People are now saying that it's that much easier to get fugitives from Dubai. In fact, we have some
Yeah.
lawyers here who are saying that they allege that a
Yeah.
lot of international laws are being broken by the transfer of wanted criminals from Dubai to India. But it doesn't happen in London, right? It can't happen
No, it
in.
doesn't. And Christian Michel's thing is one very, very important case study for that, because obviously there are UK. He's British, so there are UK based lawyers that are now arguing that his human rights conditions were, broken when UAE extradited him, and they also alleging that it was more like a quid pro quo between the two governments, which is something that UK is still not. Pretty much accused of such things yet. There's still a very long judicial process that needs to be followed for things to take place here. So that's why UK is turning out to be a more favorable destination for fugitives.
Also, as we discussed the lifestyle of the fugitives, they able to keep their lifestyle. You said, do they even for any period of time choose to live under any austerity whatsoever, or is it just as it was back home?
Well, Vijay Mallya was supposed to live under austerity. He had limits on his spending, uh, but do you think he actually adhered to any of that?
Well, technically he has to, and that still the limit that the court imposed on him will still be way above the average budget of a household. So, but no, I mean he has two massive houses, and as we know that it's spread over acres of lands. We both went there, of course, not inside. We were not invited, but yeah, so it was quite a interesting sight because in central London, his house overlooks Regent's Park. In fact, it is so big that we found out there was a proposal to start a private school there by someone else, and that didn't happen. And Vijay Mallya bought that property, so you get the idea of the scale, the enormity of that place. He has been subjected to a lot of court battles by the Indian banks. So that's where we figured out a lot many details that
Yeah.
tumbled out from those court documents.
Yeah, for example, he spends like over a lakh for groceries every week. That's his spending. He spends a few lakhs, 15 to 20 lakhs, in just maintaining his cars every week. And he has membership of really, really posh clubs that go into thousands of pounds. So these don't really look like measures of austerity, but knowing Vijay Mallya, who lives life king size as he's known for, perhaps he might consider this like scaling down his budget.
Yeah,
Um,
as we say in our book, that the very idea of having a limit, that itself will be a revolting thought for someone like Vijay Mallya, but he has to.
Also curious about the differences in the way the British media tends to cover these cases, and how much interest is there and what tends to be the coverage.
I think it's very selective. The cases have to have some interest, public interest in the UK. So Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi obviously are very well-known people in the business circles. Vijay Mallya, just because he owns businesses here and he's been quite flamboyant in his coverage. Nirav Modi hit the British fashion scene with a bang when he launched his store in New Bond Street, and he had like some of the biggest celebs endorse it. And so no one had heard about him, so everyone was very curious about Nirav Modi. Which also probably helped the Telegraph journalists to, get onto that Finding Nemo sort of a plan, right? They were the first ones to spot him. So yeah, so Nirav Modi is pretty popular in the British media as well. Not so much the others, but with Aarti Dheer and Kaval Raizada, just because the crime was so gruesome. And these two are British residents who adopted a child in Gujarat and then allegedly had him murdered for insurance money. Now, this is quite an interesting story for the British tabloids. And so we did have the Daily Mail chase them around quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, that was probably the
One
level of
case.
interest that that these extradition cases have seen by the British media.
Yeah, and also because when we go to the courts here on any single day when the extradition cases are to be heard, it's a very long list: France, U.S., Australia, Poland, you name it, and there is an extradition case from those countries that are being heard. So as I said, because London is such a cosmopolitan, a global city, it gets extradition requests from all across the world. So there has to be something really in public interest, something which is affecting the British public or catches their imagination. So as Ruhi said, Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, and then of course this British couple, and then also of course there was this case of Hanif Tiger,
Yeah.
who was basically wanted in Surat blast cases. And the issue that got the British press interested in his case was the fact that his lawyers were paid by the British taxpayers because he said that he does not have enough money to pay for his legal fees. So in Britain, those people can get access to funds so that their lawyers are paid and that they have somebody to defend them. So that was a case that got a lot of attention. Usually because it says that the taxpayers are paying for someone who is facing a very serious terror charges. In India, of course, it's again Mallya and Modi, as I said, were huge. And then the foreign press, when they came to report on these cases, they were also surprised to see a fairly large Indian press team there, waiting for Vijay Mallya to come. So yeah, the foreign press did get a taste of how the Indian press, the Indian media covers these cases. So it was quite fascinating.
Yeah,
But
but also with the Indian media, it was these cases that got everyone flocked to it. We've attended other cases where we were the only people who were sitting during those hearings, and to me, those cases were equally important. Aarti Dheer and Kaval Raizada, it's a really gruesome crime, that they were alleged to have committed. And I would have hoped that there were more Indian press reporting on such things, and not just because these two are not as glamorous as Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi, this gets pushed down the drain. But I thought it was super important that the Indian press should have covered it. But in many, many instances, there was practically no one there apart from us. So, yeah, I think the Indian press also needs to look at a wider circle of such cases.
Absolutely. Also, what is the Mumbai connection, particularly if you could elaborate on where Mumbai figures in these India UK extradition battles? We've seen some high profile individuals who've been there. Was it the cases of Iqbal Mirchi and Nadeem Safi that sort of kick-started this phenomenon?
well, yeah, I mean, Nadeem Saifi and Iqbal Mirchi, of course, wanted by the Mumbai police, so it was a direct connection. But even before that, in fact, the earliest case that we write is about this person called Mubarak Ali Ahmed, who was wanted by the Mumbai police on very serious fraud charges. And it's a very dramatic story, straight out of a Bollywood flick. And this Mubarak Ali Ahmed was living in Churchgate in the CCI quarters and attending the trial which had started. And I'm speaking about the late 1940s, in fact, 1950. And he just escaped from his room in CCI. He had a Mumbai police constable watching over him, but he somehow managed to escape from Mumbai, and ultimately he landed in London. So it was the Bombay police officer who traveled from Bombay in 1952 to London, and then they got Mubarak Ali Ahmed back, and then he faced the trial at the Bombay Sessions Court, as it was known. So that was, in fact, the first major success that India scored in getting fugitives from London, and that was a case pertaining to Bombay. And then we had Nadeem Saifi and Iqbal Mirchi. Again, it was the paperwork from the Mumbai police that formed the backbone of these cases against them, but flopped. Iqbal Mirchi's case was very surprising because uh, the case didn't even go for a trial. The magistrate said that there is no evidence that the Mumbai police has presented. So that was a very shocking and shoddy paperwork, I should say, from the Mumbai police on that front. But the new cases have Mumbai angle as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's not forget the Narang brothers, right? They had
Yeah.
this really interesting swimming pool in their bungalow in Pali Hill, which was a talk of not just the city but the entire country. So Bombay again keeps coming back into it. Then even with the new cases, we keep seeing this Bombay Mumbai connection with Arthur Road Jail. Arthur Road Jail. I think the authorities there have done fantastic work, because one of the big points of contention in Vijay Mallya's case was jail conditions, and many fugitives managed to wriggle out earlier, citing those human right abuses in Indian jails. And Arthur Road Jail was very good at sending every kind of documentation that the British court asked, whether it was photographs, videos, assurances by the government that said that these jails would provide the things that were required, and that also helped turn the tide. So yeah, I think it's like we keep hearing Mumbai in a lot of cases that are also probably not out of Mumbai. So the connection is always going to be there.
And also, Ranjita, being in Mumbai, we haven't been to the jails so much, but the videos here are being shown regularly of the Arthur Road jail, that we now seem to know Arthur Road jail much better sitting here in London than when we were in Bombay.
Reporting in Bombay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, you talk of the paperwork. So, over the years, have there been lessons that have been learned, and is the paperwork that is provided and this sort of track record with gathering evidence, has that improved on the Indian side?
Absolutely. I mean, if you take Ravi Shankaran's case, the entire case that was created was hinged on one witness testimony. Now, this is a guy that is alleged to have sold defense secrets for commercial purposes. Now, this is a huge, huge crime if you look at the magnitude of that and the threat to the country. And the entire case was based on just one witness statement. And then that witness turned hostile, gave another statement to Ravi Shankaran's lawyers, which was far well documented than what the authorities, the investigating officers did. And obviously, the case fell through. So that is the greatest example of a shoddy paperwork, but there's also been such bad paperwork that the cases have not even, proceeded to trial stage.
Yeah, so we had this case of a takeover tycoon, so-called takeover tycoon from Chennai, Raja Ratinam, who was known for taking over companies and then starting new businesses, and he was also the subject of an extradition request by India. But the judge said that, I mean, whatever paperwork that India has given, it just doesn't make any sense. It's just a narrative of events, that this is what has happened. But where is the evidence? So that case was just thrown out, and he is a free man. But as we have been speaking,
Mhm.
Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi cases, fantastic paperwork by the CBI, by the Enforcement Directorate, a lot of papers in proper order, the evidence stacked up, the documents that were submitted, they passed the muster. So, and India scored victory in both these cases.
Yeah.
Also, Sanjeev Chawla, the person who's alleged to have played a huge part in match fixing, he is also in Delhi back home, because the Delhi police and the CBI, they provided all the right papers at the right time. That's also important. Things have improved, but clearly, if the paperwork doesn't match the standard, then it will be a defeat for India.
But I also think public outrage and media scrutiny plays a very, very important role in ensuring that the paperwork that is submitted to courts is good. Because we still had cases that fell through because of documents not reaching in time or which were not correct. Just like Aarti Dhiran Kanwar Rai Sada's case fell through for a very, very silly reason, that the document that was required did not make it to court in time. It had massive delays. The court was frustrated and said that, you've had all the time in the world to give me this one piece of document from the right authority at the right time, and India did not manage to do that, leading to those two being set free. So again, I really think public outrage and media scrutiny are perhaps the key to ensure that the investigating officers are, pulling up their socks and submitting good paperwork to the courts here.
I was also wondering if at all, because in the case of the Raymond Valley trial, which you discuss in a chapter, there were some independent reports which also, where the CBI had brought up racial bias when the extradition was refused. Is there any element or any, what's your take on that, or what do you feel about the racial aspect? Does it come into play?
It's important to set out the background to Raymond Varley. He is actually a convicted pedophile. In the 70s and 80s, he was arrested and he was convicted for child sexual abuse. So he already has a history. I mean, the problem in this case happened was, I mean, very shocking actually. So as we have been speaking about, that the courts here want to ensure that the person who is being sent back will get the facilities, and also that his health is of a certain order. So Raymond Varley himself got examined by by a medical professional, certifying that he has the onset of dementia. Now, what the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service that represents India, had to do was tell the court that we will want him to be examined by another independent expert. because that's how you counter the evidence from the opposing party. If one person has put in an expert report, you then put into place your own experts to counter that argument.
Mhm.
The court did not get any application from India to have Raymond Wale examined by another expert. So the judge said that because there is onset of dementia and it has been shown that it will breach his human right if he is asked to go to India and stand trial, he has to be set free. Now, the interesting aspect in this is that the court said that the prima facie case has been made out against him, which means that they were convinced that Raymond Varley has a case to answer. They also didn't agree that because it's been a long time since the case was filed against him, it's time barred. They said that no, he has to go and he has to face the charges. But because his mental health is declining, we can't allow him to go. So the judge
Yeah.
said that I have no option but to set him free.
So if
And
you look at the entire case, you do realize that they were not, they're not standing up to protect him. They did not really protect him in every phase. They look at evidence, they look at the reports that are put before them, and they take a decision. So if only India or CPS representing India had asked or challenged the claims of dementia, that would have strengthened India's case. And it's not just with Raymond Wale. We've seen that with so many fugitives from across the world of all kinds of racial backgrounds that have managed to be free because of mental health issues, because that is taken very seriously in the courts here. And that is also one of the things that Nirav Modi is now hinging his entire high court hearing and case on the mental health of the individual.
I
There's
think it was
not
also miscommunication, lack
could
of
have been.
professionalism, some things getting lost in translation. All of that contributed to a not proper follow up, which resulted in this shocking acquittal of Raymond
Yeah.
Wale.
And we hear this several times in the courtrooms, even by the CPS, that says that the Indian authorities are taking very long to send documents and things like that. So maybe that's an area where India needs to work a little bit harder to have this ongoing communication with the CPS, because they are the ones representing India. So maybe that needs to be tightened for a stronger case to be made in the courts here.
So it's a combination of things at work there. But really, one of the most shocking acquittals, because, I mean, on the one hand, there's the human rights of the person in question, but also the nature of this crime being as gruesome and hard to digest. One of the concluding questions I had was about what were some of the most interesting insights for you as journalists and researchers in the course of writing this book, if you could share some.
Once when we started writing, it became difficult to take a decision on where and how should we stop. So so Vijay Mallya, for example, how one of his defense was that I should not be sent back to India because the jails are not good. They will breach my human rights, and my health is not in the best of shape. So it will not be good enough. But I actually found a document where it was revealed that Vijay Mallya's grandfather, in fact, was a medical doctor in Indian jails. And he was responsible for the upkeep of the jails and to ensure that the inmates have access to healthcare and that they are taken care of. And in fact, he did a fantastic job. Vijay Mallya's grandfather got a lot of promotion, and he became quite senior in his service by virtue of his good work in the Indian jails. He was a medical doctor. So we found it quite interesting and a huge contrast
Yeah.
that now his grandson was telling British courts here that the Indian jails are not good enough for me, and no problems with that. He is free to make that argument, but just it was a very interesting tidbit to discover.
As we kept digging deeper into these cases, like the properties, how were these properties bought? When were they bought, and who owns them? Okay, and that's it's a huge quagmire of you know maze. Like you would get lost. It wouldn't take you all the way to Vijay Mallya or Nirav Modi, because you have all these shell companies that have been created that have their base in offshore tax havens. So we studied this entire movement of money in these chains and how these things, which are not illegal in the UK, these are channels that you could legally use. You could open companies in British Virgin Islands or Nevis, and then you could use those companies to buy property in the UK. This is a legal channel, but it's also a channel that hides a lot of origin of where these funds come from or who they belong to, and also these trusts that just pop up overnight. Okay, they do not directly link to Vijay Mallya or Nirav Modi or Sanjeev Chawla or Sanjay Bhandari for that matter. And so, even though now that Vijay Mallya is bankrupt and his assets could be seized and Indian banks could have access to those to liquidate them, it will be really interesting to see if any of these properties even manage to be on that list, because although they are his properties, which is a common secret, like everyone knows, but still a secret, right? Uh, it would still be really, really difficult, if not impossible, to pin them to him and then get it liquidated to get the funds that he owes these banks. So these are also some really fascinating things, and we've explored this in quite some detail in the book, and we found it absolutely fascinating. This entire money trail that we were trying to trace.
That's really great. The money trail, always so important. We've just taken now to any concluding thoughts that you have, and also reactions to the book so far.
It's a very topical book, so we got fairly good press coverage, I must say. A lot of lawyers have shown interest. Investigating agencies, the officers, inkling that they are going through the book in great details, and also the diplomats, because there's a lot of behind the scenes activities. Extradition is such, which is a combination of foreign policy, of your diplomats' work, international law. So it has reached all these stakeholders, and we've got a very good response. In fact, some lawyers here are already using our book to cite in the reports that they are going to submit to the government here on aspects of extradition. So it's been a very good response. But yeah, we see that a lot of law students also seem to have taken interest in this, because as we have tried to make the extradition law a bit more accessible and as much as we could, it's quite a challenge to make it, to simplify it. So the response has been good, and as I said, Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi cases, everybody knows about them, and there is always new requests that India is making or has been making to United Kingdom. So the interest is there.
Yeah, even from our side, the interest is there. We've written the book, but we haven't concluded our research. We haven't called it the end. These Some of these cases are ongoing, and also this the extradition is evolving. So we do keep an eye out for these things. We are looking at the changes and trends. Julian Assange case is a really interesting case that we are following to see how the mental health issue plays out, which might have implications or lessons for Nirav Modi's lawyers to pick up from. So it's so fascinating that, like, for us, the book hasn't ended. It's just the start of the curiosity that is helping us carry through with, figuring out where this extradition is heading. But also, the book is almost timeless because we have a lot of cases that have concluded. And so it's also a historical perspective to extradition, which we hope people enjoy for many years to come.
As an evolving aspect, mental health is going to be really interesting to watch. So it'll be great to see what else comes up on that from you. And it's a document of sorts of what all has been going on, and sort of a ready reckoner for the way the law has evolved and the background in which that's happened. I have really enjoyed this conversation, and thanks a lot, Danish and Ruby.
Thank you, Ranjita. It was such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Subscribe to Midday India. Get direct notifications on all our videos by clicking on the bell icon.